my friends. Oh, hey, I'm up here in the corner. Hi, I'm Dennis Gebhart. I wanted to thank you, first of all, for investing in your education and purchasing this webinar. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This program is called Principles of Color. My job today is to guide you through some of the principles of color and share with you the information as the way we present it at Guru Village. So, if you are ready, so am I. Hopefully you have your notebook beside you and you're ready to take some notes. I'm going to eliminate myself from the picture and we shall begin. All right, so this program is the intellectual property of myself and my company, Guru Village. Any use or publication of this information without express permission from the author is prohibited. What does that mean? That means for you, salon professional that purchased this program, this is your resource. You're more than welcome to go back and revisit the information over and over and over again to use it to help strengthen and empower yourself as a color specialist. However, we ask that you don't share it on social media. And if you're going to use this, if you're an educator and you're going to use some of this information in a class, we recommend that you get our permission first. Very, very important. So simply knowing that, I am happy to move forward at this point. All right. Today you're going to probably hear some information that may be a little contrary to your belief systems. The reason that I say that to you is that I think that hair color, even though we cover it as a general term, is probably still one of the most misunderstood services that we perform in salons today. Why is that? Because we have so many varied opinions about how hair color works. I am sure, like me, you've gone to educational events, attended a color class or more than one, and walked out of the class going, wow, that's not the way I think about color, or walked out of a class saying, well, why does their story about how hair color works different from the class I just attended? And the reason for that is because even though we consider ourselves a profession, for many years and even up to today, we still operate as a craft, meaning that many of us were taught color by the side of the person who mentored us after we graduated from beauty school. I don't know about you, but when I attended beauty school, they took me into a freshman room one day, a room called freshman room. They said, memorize the color wheel and read the chapter on hair color. And then my instructor came back after about 45 minutes and reread the same chapter back to me that I had just read. That was my profound hair color theory. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Most of the things I learned about color, I learned after I got out of beauty school and got into the salon. And many of the things that I learned were not really the why of how hair color worked, but simply the how. Meaning that if I were to ask the person who was training me, why does that work that way? Why does that happen that way? And they would say to me, don't ask me why, just do what I tell you. Some of you can probably relate to that as well. So today you're probably going to hear me share information with you that may be contrary to your belief system or the way your mentor trained you or past experiences that you have. So I'm going to ask a huge favor of you today. I want you to open your mind to the information. Write down all the notes. You can sort through them afterwards, but most importantly, take in the information, reflect upon it, digest it, and see whether or not it works for you. Listen, if this information doesn't work for you, I'm okay with that. But I find many of the times, if I take in information and I keep my mind open, I do make some discoveries. So hopefully we will do that for you today. I'm going to focus in 3 areas in this program. The first area I'm going to focus on is the area of affirmation. Some of the things I'm going to share with you today, you've already heard before. It may be the way you've been trained. That's called an affirmation. That means that you're on the right track. That means that you and I are like-minded when it comes to thinking about hair color. That's a good thing. Affirmations are reassurances that what you're doing is what others are doing as well. I'm also going to focus on discoveries today. My goal is to hopefully you will discover maybe not information you've never heard before, but maybe a way of looking at principles of color with a different set of glasses or a different perception. So we're going to focus on trying to create some discoveries. At the end of this segment, I will ask you to make a list of the discoveries that you've made today. And my goal is that you will have a nice list of discoveries that you have made. Finally, I'm going to focus on empowerment. I truly believe, like I'm sure you do, that after an educational event, when I've learned information or gathered new information or gathered a new way of perception or behavior or techniques, I feel empowered. And I really want to get back to work right away and put the new things that I have learned into use. Here's the thing I'm going to ask you to do today. I'm going to share with you some of the ways that I formulate hair color, which may be a little outside the box. So I'm going to ask you to do some personal homework. At the end of this program, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of personal homework on your own until you've digested this. Here's what I know about new information. If I receive new information and I immediately go out and try to apply it right away, sometimes I miss some of the pieces because I know it takes time for me to review it over and over again. In fact, the experts say that you should review the class you've taken within the first 24 hours. That way it helps embed that learning and it helps you really get a good common understanding and a good foundation on the information. So when we talk about principles of hair color, there's certain things that we need to be aware of. First of all, the law of color. That sounds ominous, doesn't it? The law of color. But truly, there are principles that operate when we color hair. And there are actually principles of color in general. And so today I want to go over those with you. Undertones we don't cover in this class, but you have to know that when I color hair, the result of my color is a combination of the color that I formulate and the pigmentation that the hair contributes. We have a program called Formulation Foundation where you can get more information on how to formulate your color in relationship to the undertones that hair contributes. Also, you may hear me talk a lot about reflection and absorption. In color, I find that understanding reflect and absorption is very, very important. Now, what do I mean by that? Sometimes we misinterpret reflect for a shade being lighter. And in reality, if the shade is warmer or if the shade has more warm tones in it, it can reflect and almost be a half a level to a level lighter than the actual level that it is. Absorption does the same thing. When I formulate hair color and I'm trying to create depth in my result, depth does not always mean using a darker shade. Depth can be created by adding cooler tones to my formula, and that will help me then create that visual interpretation or that visual illusion of the hair color being darker. And of course, formulation is very important in hair color. And one of the things I always say about formulation is that I find that most salon professionals in our industry today, or should I say many, formulate one of three ways. One, they formulate by recipe, meaning it's the recipe that I've always used. I know the recipe works, and so it's the one I'm going to use when I formulate every hair color. We did that back in the day. We used to have a weaving formula for hair. No matter what color your hair was, we would weave it, and the product we used was Clairol, and the formula was 1 part topaz, 1 part moon gold, and 1 part flaxen blonde. And we wove everyone with the same recipe because it was a recipe that we were taught. I'm sure you can relate to that. That's why many of us in our industry only use about 6 shades of color in any given line that we use. We all have our favorites. So when a client comes in and they're interested in a red shade, we have our favorite red formula. We have our favorite blonde shade. I'm sure you have high lift blondes in your back room, and you probably have 4 or 5 shades to choose from, but I'll guarantee you there's one that you use 95% of the time because it is your favorite. So formulation, and a lot of formulation is done by recipe. The second way we formulate is by what I call the hair color quarterback. You know who you are if you're watching this video today. You are the person they walk over to, they go, look, don't let her see you, but walk by my client. Don't let her see you looking, but then take a look at that head, come back and kind of help me with my formulation. I'm sure many of you can relate to people in your salon that are go-to people when you get into an issue with formulation. And those are the people that help you out. And I call those the hair color quarterbacks because you know, they're quarterbacking everybody's formula in the salon, which is a huge responsibility, by the way, because whether you know it or not, if you quarterback somebody else's hair color formula, then you have accepted responsibility for the result. Oh no, don't tell me that, but it's true. It's so true. Finally, the last the way we formulate is what I call everything but the kitchen sink. You've seen people do this. They put in 1 ounce of something, they put in a half an ounce of something else, a quarter of an ounce of something else, 1 ribbon inch of something else, 1 drop, 1 dollop, 1 splash. We formulate like we cook. And the experts say that after the first 2 colors you mix, everything else is emotion. So it's important to think about that. Most successful formulas are made with 1 base, 1 formulation, or maybe 2, or maybe 1 in an accent color. I think we end up complicating the formula, putting so many things in the bowl because of fear. We put a little bit of ash in there in case we go too warm. We put a little bit of warmth in there in case we go too flat. And so we end up having these personal mental conversations with ourselves at the color bar or in the back room. And it's always, what if? Yeah, but. And we make a bowl of what I call safe, meaning that if the client says, well, it's kind of brassy, you say, well, I put ash in it. If she says, well, it's a little ash, a little flat looking, well, I put warmth in it. So, and that's because no one taught us how to formulate. And so today, our goal is to, first of all, get you to have a basic understanding of principles of color, and then move you into a formulation session. Remember that hair color principles have 3 things in common. They are, first of all, universal, meaning no matter where you are, no matter what country you live in, no matter what altitude you live at, no matter what your genetic background is, no matter where anything, they happen to everyone, okay? And they affect everyone. So blue, red, and yellow are the 3 primary colors, no matter what country you live in, no matter what language you speak. The reason I say blue, red, and yellow in that order is because that's the order of their dominance. Blue is the strongest, red is the second strongest, and of course yellow is what we would regard as the weakest when you're mixing them in equal portion. We also know that color principles are timeless. We are still operating on the same principles today that we operated on 30, 40 years ago. The principles do not change. What changes through time or over time are the rules. Manufacturers come along and they create new rules, but the principles still don't change. If I leave bleach on the hair too long, the hair will break. If I put an ash tone on an extremely light head of hair and porous, the hair will go flat, guaranteed. So there are certain principles, or there are principles that govern you no matter whether you were doing hair 20 years ago or you're doing hair today. They are timeless. We also say that hair color principles are self-evident. You can actually see those kinds of things happen. And so knowing those 3 things helps us understand that if we operate within the principles of hair color, we can have success, we can be very creative. There are many things that we can do, but the moment we try to operate outside the principles of hair color, that's when hair color goes sideways. So let's talk about color in general. And you know, you always hear people talk about color in relationship to light. And I want to take you in a slightly different direction today. I want to talk to you about color in relationship to vision. Because I don't know about you, but I was always the guy who asked why. I asked why are blue, red, and yellow the primary colors? Who made that rule? And the reality is blue, red, and yellow are the primary colors because it is, as human beings, it is the way that we see. It is called trichromatism, T-R-I, chromatism. We, in the back of our eyes, we have two sets of receptors. One set of receptors are called rods, and they determine the gradations of dark to light. So when we look at something, that depth, that perception is measured by the receptors in the back of our eyes that are identified as rods. Now, we have more rods than we have cones. Most all human species do. There are other species on Earth that have more cones than rods. There are some species on Earth that have very few cones in the back of their eye. And so that changes the way that different creatures on Earth see. We also have cones in the back of our eye. They are receptors that measure the primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. So they receive those tones. So when someone says to you that they're colorblind, it's because some of their receptors are not accurately functioning, and that's why certain colors look different to them than they do to others. So knowing that vision plays an important role in color, we have to understand that it's as important as light is. And I find that tuning your hair color eye is very important in our industry. It's like in the music business. You know, in music business, you have to, if you want to know where the key of A is, you have to practice finding that key of A, always finding that key so you know where it is automatically. So when it comes to perceiving tonalities in hair, our vision is something that we much times have to fine tune. You know, are you able to visually see when there are flat tones? Are you able to see when the red is more mahogany than it is red? Are you able to see when the gold is really muddy and it's not a clear golden tone? And that all comes from practicing and tuning our eye so we can see those variations of tone. So rods and cones help us to see the color. Now, we know the reason that we are able to see those is because of light which comes from the sun. The sun emits rays in what we call wavelengths. Some of those wavelengths are very long, some of them are shorter. Let me give you an example of some of the long and short wavelengths that the sun emits, or energy. For things like broadcast waves, radio waves, radar waves, microwaves, infrared waves. Shorter wavelengths are wavelengths like cosmic rays, gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet rays. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be about hair color, and you're talking about gamma rays. How do those two things relate? Quite simple. If you look at the chart in front of you, you'll find that directly between ultraviolet rays and infrared rays is where the visible spectrum exists. Now, I know you remember in beauty school, someone giving you the Newton's law, so like white light reflected through a three-sided prism breaks into the visible spectrum. Well, this is where that visible spectrum it exists. This is where we can actually see those colors. Now, I want you to look and see that these wavelengths are different in length. If you look at a violet or indigo wavelength, it's about 400 nanometers. If you look at a red wavelength, it's about 700 nanometers, meaning that some are longer, some are shorter. Now, here's what's interesting. As this visible spectrum, as the sun projects its wavelengths and shines on an object, certain objects, they absorb certain color tones, certain wavelengths, and they reject others. And usually that's how we identify the color. For example, a red apple actually absorbs colors and then it rejects colors. And so that's how we identify it as being red. And this relates even to human beings. Human beings absorb certain wavelengths and reject others. And so when we talk about color, it is all part of not only the energy, the light from the sun, it's also part of the way that we see. So if we were to look at human beings, we would see that the colors that they reject, or absorb, I should say, are violet, indigo, and blue. This is where your UVA and UVB rays exist. The colors that they reject, or project, I should say, are green, yellow, orange, and red. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, I've not seen too many green people, unless I was having a crazy nightmare dream. So let's break this down. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to break it down. Green, if you look at the top of the screen, is equal parts of blue and yellow. So I want you to write that on your workbook. Equal parts of blue and yellow. Yellow is simply yellow, so write that down. Orange is equal parts of red and yellow, so write those down, please, red plus yellow. And then red is simply red. Now, if you look down at your page, you will see that you have 1 part blue, 2 parts red, 3 parts yellow, which actually make up the color brown. So what I want to share with you today is that all human beings are brown in different gradations, meaning that some are deeper shades of brown, some are lighter shades of brown. There are no red people, even in Oklahoma. There are no yellow people, even in Asia. And certainly there are no black people, even in Africa. We are all gradations of brown. You say, well, then why are some skins darker than the others? Has to do with pigmentation in the body. Imagine this. If I were born on the equator where the sun strikes the earth directly, I would probably have darker skin because my body would produce more pigmentation to protect me. I would also probably have nappy hair to protect my scalp, to protect my head. But if you move north, if you move to northern Africa, go through that part of the world, you'll find that the skin tone actually gets lighter. Why? Because the sun is no longer striking the earth directly, it is striking the earth at more of an angle. When you get into southern Europe, the skin tone even gets lighter. Middle Europe, much lighter. All the way until you get into the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, all that Scandinavian area where people have light skin, light hair, and light eyes. So when we think about pigmentation in the body and we think about hair color and color in general, hair color, I should say, we are all brown. Brown is what we try to achieve. If you think about it in relationship to hair, black hair is nothing more than brown hair with the highest concentration of blue. Red hair is nothing more than brown hair with the highest concentration of red. Blonde hair is nothing more than brown hair with the highest concentration of yellow. But in all cases, we are trying to achieve, when we color hair, some degree or level of brown. So here's what I want you to do. Make some notes on your worksheet. Did you make any discoveries in this first piece? Is there anything that's different than what you learned originally? Is there new information that possibly you want to reflect upon and digest a little bit and see how it applies to you? Very, very important. Here's the thing about when we move into these moments when we start to reflect. What you want to do is you want to absorb the information, read over the notes that you have taken, reflect upon it. Do I really understand what this means? Review it. Review your notes if necessary so that you can, become familiar with them again. And then ask yourself, how can I use this in my daily activity? Can I apply some of the information I have just learned in my daily activity? Possibly you never knew that vision was a primary player in understanding and reading hair color. Possibly you never understood or never knew where that visible spectrum actually existed. Possibly, or maybe you never knew, that truly we are all different gradations of brown. Or possibly, or maybe you never knew that brown is 1 part blue, 2 parts red, 3 parts yellow. I cannot tell you how many people in our industry actually believe that brown is equal parts blue, red, and yellow. And that's crazy because it's not. So hopefully you've written down some questions. If you have questions, we invite you to send it in to our website. You can go to www.guruvillage.net and send the information into our website, or you can reach out to us on email. You can reach out to us on Facebook. If you go to Guru Village, we have a Facebook page. Type your question in there. We'll get notification of it, and we'll try and answer that for you. All right, so let's move forward. Now, I know you're familiar with this. This is the color wheel. We all learned it. Well, we didn't learn it. We all saw it in beauty school. The reason I say we didn't necessarily learn it, sometimes we know things, but we don't understand them. And I think that's what's happened to many of us with the color wheel. Now, why do I say that? Here's why I say that. I find that many salons today don't even use a color wheel when they formulate hair color, unless they're in trouble. And then, of course, when they're in trouble, you see them go grab the color wheel and they stare at it, kind of waiting for it to mentally send them the answer. And I think, again, that's because we are so used to formulating by recipe or by consensus, or just going back and rolling the dice when we formulate, that we never think about the color wheel once we get out of beauty school, unless we're in trouble. So here's the thing that I want to share with you today. Although this is the wheel that you are probably most familiar with, the actual wheel that we should have been taught is this one here. Now, this is quite different. I'm sure you're going to say to yourself, well, I've never seen this color wheel. And that's because in beauty school, they taught us just the minimum of what we needed to know. I want you to understand that you were really taught just the minimum to get you to pass a test. Much of the education that you will learn or you will gain, it is your responsibility once you get into the industry to seek out good education that will help you grow as a salon professional. And in hair color, here's what they should have told us. They should have talked to us about hue and value and chroma. But I find so many people are not familiar with those terms because they were never taught that in school. We were taught complementary colors, and we were taught 9 shades on the color wheel. Now, here's what I want you to notice on this color wheel. You see the horizontal circle. This is a horizontal circle. This is hue, H-U-E, which is the color, meaning that, it's green, yellow, orange, red, violet, blue, blue-violet, blue-green, so on and so forth. This circle here is the hue. These are the colors that are on the color wheel. But actually, it's really a color sphere, because if you think about it, this is a complete circle. This means that there are 360 different hues that can be created on the color wheel. And we learned how many? 9. Frightening, isn't it? And now, if you think about that, then you say, all right, the value is the vertical measurement in the center of the wheel. This is what you would call your level system, if you will. And if you take the value system, which is 0 to 10, and you multiply that times 360, it tells you that vertically and horizontally, it now allows us to create over 3,600 different hues or tones. 3,600. And remember, we learned 9. Okay? So these things are very, very important. And now the third member of this trifecta is called chroma. Chroma is a radial measurement. So it's measured from the center of the color wheel to the outside ring of the color wheel. It determines saturation. There are 18 chromatic rings from the center to the outside, meaning that the closer to the outside of the color wheel I get, the more bright or the more saturation of a tone I have. So pure tones are in the very outside ring of the color wheel. The closer to the center that I get, the more flat, drab, or muted my result or my color will be. Nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to have, but understand that when we mix closer to the center of the wheel, we get a more flat, drab, muted result. When we mix closer to the outside of the color wheel, we get a brighter, more tonal saturation. So think back about what you learned in beauty school. You learned that if there was red, you would mix green, and they say it would take you to the center of the wheel, and it would neutralize it. Actually, what it was doing was flattening everything out. It was just muting and drabbing out your color. If you want that kind of a result, that's great. But if you want more brightness, more intensity, you have to move closer to the outside of the ring. But let's add a little math to this. I know there's 360 different tones horizontally. I know there's 10 levels bottom to top. That gives me 3,600 choices. But there's also 18 chromatic rings. And 18 chromatic rings, in addition to everything else, will now give me 64,800 options of hues, depths, and radial measurements. So can you understand this is really not a color wheel, it's a color sphere. It's a color sphere. And yet we only deal with 9 tones. That is why many times we limit ourselves in what we're trying to create, because we don't understand all the different tones that are available for us. So I think this is just, every hairdresser should be taught on this wheel. All right, so let's go back to the conventional wheel, and let me share with you what I believe they should have taught us in beauty school. The first thing they should have said is that every color on this wheel can be identified in one of 4 ways. It can be identified by name. It tells you what the name of the color is. Sorry. Let me back up. When we go across the color wheel here, we're dealing with complementary tones. This is what we're all familiar with. We've all learned this. But they probably didn't talk to you much about harmonic tones. And harmonic tones are on the outside of the color wheel. They set side by side, complementary tones set across from each other. So if I am using a complementary tone, I am accentuating the color it's across from. In other words, if I want to create a red shade and I want to look outstanding, I back it up with green. In other words, set it in a green atmosphere and the red looks even more red. So complementary tones are really enhancements to each other. Harmonic tones are colors that can set side by side. Now, why do I talk about harmonic tones? But because in color correction, understanding harmonic tones is huge. Let's imagine that you're trying to remove artificial pigment from the hair, and it's a very bright, bright red. And so you're using your, let's say you're going to use a lightener. And so as you lighten it, it simply stays red, but it gets lighter and lighter and lighter, and sometimes even brighter. And the reason for that is because you're trying to break it down or lighten it in the head of hair. If I were to take instead and add gold or yellow to my red shade, I would change the color closer to something that is orange or copper, and as I lightened it, it would lighten much more successfully for me because I mixed it with a harmonic tone to help it lighten out of the hair. On the cool side of the wheel, harmonic cool tones, this is the way you can control warmth. Sometimes, based upon the base of the color that the manufacturer has, sometimes they simply give you something that's a blue base or a blue violet base. And sometimes you need to try to cover the whole gamut. So if I understand that this whole area here between green and violet really are designed to control warmth, if I want to maximize the control of the warmth, I want to have as many cool tones, combinations as possible in a harmonic mix. Many manufacturers make a series of colors called matte, M-A-T-T-E. Those matte shades really have a combination, for many of them, of green, blue, and violet. They're all combined together, all combined together. All right, so this kind of gives you an idea about harmonic and complementary. All right, so now to the wheel that you know, and let's talk about the things they should have taught us about this wheel in color class. One, they should have said every color on this wheel can be identified in one of four ways. First of all, by name. It tells you what the color is. Second of all, it can be identified by group name, tells you which group it belongs to. There are three groups on this wheel: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Next, it can be identified by mathematical number. It tells you how many parts are in each color. I think it would be beneficial if we knew how many parts were in beige, if we knew how many parts were in copper, if we knew how many parts were in gold. I think you'd probably find that to be a great help. And finally, every color can be identified with what we call letter identification, or what we call hair color code. Now, we're about to talk about the way that I formulate hair color. I'm saying I because this is my system. I was taught on hair color code. I was taught to map out my color. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you hair color code. And then I'm going to show you some examples of how to use it in mapping out colors. Your homework with this program. Oh, you didn't know there was homework? Well, there's always homework when you take a Guru Village program. But it's optional, which means that you can choose to do it or not. Many people may choose not to do it, but I really encourage you to do the homework, because when you do the homework, it's going to help embed this information in your mind, especially if you find this beneficial. All right, so let's talk about the code first. So here we go. We begin. It's all alpha. So if you take your color wheel, you can go around the color wheel with me. Blue is identified with the letter B. Red with the letter R. Yellow with the letter Y. When I mix blue and red together, I create a color called violet. It is identified with the letters BR. One part blue, one part red. When I mix red and yellow together, I create a color called orange. Orange is identified with the letters RY. One part red, one part yellow. When I mix yellow and blue together, I create a color called green. Green is identified with the letters BY. One part blue, one part yellow. Now, if I take blue and violet and I mix them together, I create a third set of colors called tertiary. And the tertiary color I create with blue and violet is called blue violet. It is identified with BBR. It is two parts of blue, one part of red. When I mix red and violet together, I create a color called red violet. And red violet is identified with the letters RRB. That's two parts of red, one part of blue. When I mix red and orange together, I create a color called red-orange, or uh, 2 parts of red, 1 part of yellow, RRY. When I mix yellow and orange together, I create a color called yellow-orange, which is YYR. When I mix yellow and green together, I create a color called yellow-green, which is YYB. When I mix blue and green together, I can create a color called blue-green, which is BBY. All right, so now you can see that this color wheel gets a little bit more complicated. But here's the interesting thing. If you look down at the bottom of your color wheel where there's BR in the violet category, why is that important to know? Because every manufacturer that creates beige families, they have a violet in their background. They have violet as part of the background of that color. So I could walk into any salon today, any back room, pull out any color brand that they're using, and if I pick the beige family, I immediately know that there's some degree of violet in that beige family. So I'm already ahead of the game, and I don't have to be concerned about learning one color over another color. In our industry, we believe that one color is so much more foreign to the color we're using, and in reality, they are not. They all still are based upon the same principles. So as long as you understand the principles, it does not matter what brand you use. There will be variations. Some may have more brown background. Some may have additional, rather than just violet, they may have golden violet in their beige family. You know, there may be some variation, but you can overcome any challenges quite easily once you're grounded in how all hair color works. So let's look over here at RRB red violet, but in the world of hair color, that's called mahogany. So whenever I'm using a family of colors that say that they're mahogany, that's the descriptor, I know that they're going to be closer to a red violet. There's going to be much more red in that color. So now I can formulate that color, understanding, you know, if I don't have a chance to dye it out, I can formulate that color and have a pretty good understanding of what it is. If you move up here to RRY, okay, red-orange, this is where coppers live. Virtually all copper shades live in this category, in that red-orange category. Now, I had someone say to me one time, she said, well, I thought that copper was orange. And the reality is, copper is not orange, copper's copper. Orange is orange. Those are two completely different colors. So if I'm using a copper shade, I know most often it will have more red than it will have orange. So I know how to formulate. I can use that to formulate and be much more successful or closer to achieving my result because I know what the color copper is. If you go up here to YYR, 2 parts yellow, 1 part red, or what we call yellow-orange, yellow-orange is really gold. Gold is actually made up of 2 parts of yellow, 1 part of red. That's the color gold. So when a client says, I want to be golden blonde with no red, you say, well, excuse me, but gold has red in it. And so you're telling me you want to be yellow. Well, no, I don't want to be yellow. I want to be gold. So the only way to make yellow gold is to add some red to it. So understanding where gold is, and don't believe me, if you're wearing gold jewelry, look at your jewelry and look using your eye to interpret the tones. You will see the red hue, the soft red hue that's in that golden color. It's see, whenever we use terms like, you know, gold, beige, violet, those are general terms and they're not broken down into parts. And so sometimes we misinterpret it. I think one of the most misinterpreted ones lately in the last couple of years is chocolate. You know, clients come in and they go, I want to be chocolate. And they say, but no warmth. Well, I'm sorry, but chocolate has warmth. Chocolate is a warm color. go to the store, buy yourself a Hershey's candy bar. When you look at it, you will see that it is not a cool color. It is truly a warm shade. So when clients use food analogies or broad stroked names for these colors, that's where we get into problems. You know, if someone says, make me chocolate, and your chocolate has warmth and their chocolate doesn't have warmth, you're already going to be on the losing end of that deal, because you have two different visions of what the color chocolate is. So very, very important that we understand, you know, what these colors are and how they make up everything that we work with. Over here, where you've got, of course, green, blue, violet, and all of those colors, those are all used many times to just control the warmth. They are used as background. They add them into colors. Let me show you how that works. Usually in the center of the wheel, still today, there are manufacturers and educators who teach the center of the wheel is brown, which in fact it is not, because brown is 1 part blue, 2 parts red, and 3 parts yellow. As you can see, brown really is in the upper left-hand corner of the color wheel. And I'm sure you're going, wait, I've never seen brown in that position. You see they put it in the center. And that's incorrect. I have a video on YouTube. I think it's called Truth versus Tale, episode 1. And I actually take food coloring and I mix equal parts of blue, red, and yellow, and I make the color black. And then I add 1 part additional red, 2 parts additional yellow, and it turns to brown. So that we're totally clear that brown is 1 part blue, 2 parts red, 3 parts yellow. It is a warm, uneven combination of the 3 primary colors. You say, well, why do they teach equal parts blue, red, and yellow? Here's why. Because according to the law of color, it's a law of physics, equal parts of blue, red, and yellow will make black. When you dilute them out, they make the color gray. So truly, for us in hair color, the center of our color wheel is gray, meaning that when we take a color, like say there's red in the hair and I add green to it, and I pull it close to the center of the wheel, it becomes more flat, more drab, more muted. In fact, I'm sure you can remember in color class when you used watercolor, where you put 1 little splash of blue, 1 red, 1 yellow, and you really had sort of a gray thing. And even when you try to neutralize colors, it becomes more, it has more depth, because it's not really a true brown. It's sort of a brown with a gray background. So gray is really the center of our color wheel. So manufacturers, they always have brown in their background, virtually always, but then they add a cooling tone that no one ever talks about to pull it closer to the center. So you may be using a brand that has brown plus blue-green. So blue-green is going to help pull it close to the center of the color wheel. You may have a brand that has brown plus green, pull it closer to the center of the color wheel, or a brand that has brown plus blue-violet, or brown plus blue, or brown plus violet. All of these colors are used to try to pull that color towards the center of the wheel. So when you are lightening hair in the normal process, which is 75% of what we do in the salons, when you're lightening hair, you have some control over the warmth that hair is going to contribute. So the good thing about gray being in the center of the color wheel is that I use gray a lot when I am refining warmth. I do not use complementary colors. Let me say that one more time for you, because that's a little out of the box. I use gray to refine warmth and not the complementary colors. Why would I do that? Here's why. If I add gray to my formula to control warmth, I am only pulling that warm shade of color 1/4 of the way across the wheel. I'm not pulling it all the way, halfway. I'm only pulling it 25% of the way, which means that I will still keep that tone, but I will just refine it slightly, because I'm using enough, I'm using gray. It's going to refine it without burying it. If I were to take a copper color and I were to use green over the top of it or blue-green over the top of it, I would pull it closer to the center. That means now halfway, 50%, pulling those close to the center. I would pull it right to the center area and it would be too flat, too muted, and too drab. If that's what I want, you can do that. But most of my time, I find it's just refining the tone. It's not necessarily killing the tone that's in the hair. All right, so that's why I use gray a lot. Now you say, well, my brand doesn't make gray. How would I make gray? Don't try to make gray. Go buy a brand. I buy just the gray shade in a brand that has gray. Makes your life a lot easier. All right. So interesting approach to the wheel. Wouldn't you agree? And I'm sure you're probably sitting there going, holy smoke, man, I've never heard anybody talk about the wheel this way. And of course you haven't. But trust me when I tell you, if you're able to master this and you can break things down and you can think of colors in relationship to B's, R's, and Y's, it helps in formulation. See, one of the things that happens in my salon is when you come to work for me, one of the tools you're given is a white marker, a whiteboard with dry erase markers. And I request that before you ever do a color, ever mix a color, that you map the color out. And when we map a color out, we map out two things. We map out the color itself, and we map out what the hair is contributing. And then the marriage of those things together tells me what my end result will be. So in this class, I don't want to go into what the hair contributes in addition to what the color contributes. I just want to help you map out the color. So let me give you some examples of mapping out colors. So here's an example of mapping out a copper blonde. A copper blonde, you know it's going to have brown in its background. All manufacturers, they have to have brown in their color, okay? It has brown in the background, plus it has copper. So a copper blonde would be brown plus copper. So it would be 1 blue, 4 reds, and 4 yellows, okay? 1 part blue, 4 parts red, and 4 parts yellow. That is what a copper blonde would be. Now, that would be based upon, of course, the different levels. So always keep that in mind. Right now, I want to just keep it simple. A beige blonde, because remember, we talked about beige being violet. We also talked about some manufacturers putting gold in with their beige so that the beige doesn't go too flat when you're depositing over gray or when you're doing a tint back. So a beige would be brown. You can see 1 blue, 2 reds, 3 yellows, plus violet, 1 blue, 1 red, plus gold, 2 yellows, and a red. This all goes right back to your color wheel. So actually, a beige blonde is 2 parts of blue, 4 parts of red, and 5 parts of yellow. Now I know what color beige is. How about golden brown? Golden brown would be brown. You can see there's 1 blue, 2 reds, 3 yellows, and it would be plus gold. So if I am creating a golden brown, or I'm trying to realize what is a golden brown is 1 part blue, 3 parts of red, and 5 parts of yellow. Now, what if I'm using a golden brown on a head of hair that's going to contribute red? So if I do that, then I can automatically see that that's going to shift my color and may possibly make it too hot or too bright of a color. I know that before I mix. So now I can add to my formulation something to adjust for that. So I may not just use the golden brown alone. I may add another formula to it in order to compensate for what the hair is going to contribute. Or if I know the hair is going to contribute, you know, a reddish golden hue, then I don't have to worry about adding gold anyway. I could make golden brown without using gold at all. because it would be based upon what the hair is going to contribute. All right, how about ash brown? Ash brown, we mean a brown without, without warmth. And usually when we're talking about brown shades, it's level 5 and darker. When we talk about blonde shades, it's level 6 and lighter. So an ash brown would be brown. You can see brown here, 1 blue, 2 reds, 3 yellows. Okay, it could also be a brown plus green, which would be a blue and yellow. Okay, or it could be brown plus blue-green, which would be 2 parts blue, 1 part yellow. Or it could be brown plus blue-violet, which would be 2 blues and 1 red. Or it could be brown plus violet, which would be 1 blue, 1 red. You say, how do I know? Very easy. If you get yourself some fabric, probably the easiest way for you to do it, go to a fabric store, buy yourself something 100% cotton, untreated. Take your color, mix it in a bowl, a small amount of it, and simply paint it on the cotton swatch. Let the cotton swatch oxidize. Don't touch it. Mix it with 20 volume. Let the cotton swatch oxidize. Come back and check it in maybe an hour, 2 hours, and you can see the undertone exposed. It will expose the background tone in that color. So if they don't know, or if they don't tell you, you can make these discoveries on your own. All right, so here's your homework. I don't care what color you're using, get your swatch book out, and I want you to go through your swatch book and break down the different families. I want you to do it once the first time around. It's going to take you a while. Then I want you to do it a second time, and then I want you to do it a third time. Why do I want you to do it 3 times? Because by the time you do it the third time, you're going to be on track and on point. Once you've done that, then I recommend that you sign up for our virtual classroom class called Formulation Foundation. Formulation Foundation is a live class. It is not a webinar. We actually get to interact with each other, and we can walk you through how we map out formulas. We'll review, of course, some of the things you've seen in this webinar, in this pre-recorded segment. But most importantly, it'll give you a chance, and it'll give you foundation so that you won't be trying to figure out what's a B, R, and a Y. So if you've taken this, repeat this segment over again, pay attention to it, do your homework. Remember, not once, not twice, but 3 times in your swatch book. Is it a lot of work? It certainly is. Okay, can you blow it off? You can. But I recommend you don't. I recommend that you follow through with this, because one thing I do know is that once you're able to master these, you will master the world of hair color. All right? So my goal is that hopefully you had some big rocks. Here's what I want you to do. Take a clean space on your notepad and write down, what were your discoveries in this segment today? Did you discover things you didn't know before? Did you discover a different way of looking at things? What were your discoveries? Second of all, how will this apply to you? Can you use this in the salon when you're formulating? How will this apply to what you're doing every day in the salon? And finally, do you have any questions? And like I said, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. You can do that very easily. You can find us on Facebook, Guru Village. You can also go to our website, which is www.guruvillage.net. You can find us on Facebook, Guru Hair Tribe, which is a closed secret group. If you're interested in that, it is a non-branded forum. We do not promote brands of any type in that forum. We talk strictly about hair color, challenges that you might have. We answer questions. It's just really a fun group. If you're serious about learning, I recommend that you friend myself or Michael Van Horn or Jennifer Hernan. You can find all 3 of us on Facebook. And come into Guru Tribe. Come in and spend some time with us. See how it works for you. You can also find us on Instagram at Guru Village, on our YouTube channel, Dennis Gebhart or Guru Village. And here's our phone number if you have questions. Our phone number is 1-844